What would you do if your home, your only place of rest, was made unbearable by neighbors who simply didn't care? In today's story, the protagonist's choice is a masterclass in how to handle it when every polite option has failed. I ultimately had my neighbors shamed on national television and disciplined by their university. And it all started with them just wanting to have a party. It was September of 2020 when the apartment next to mine was rented out to two young women, Chloe and Sophie, both students. After they settled in, it became clear they wanted to throw a party. Normally, this wouldn't be a big deal. But this was Belgium during a full-blown COVID lockdown. The rule was strict: you were only supposed to have one single, fixed visitor over. But I get it. They were young. And I tried to be understanding. My own situation was far from relaxed. I was working in healthcare with the mentally disabled. And I'd volunteered for the ad hoc COVID team. This meant I was the one called in to care for residents who were sick, in quarantine, or had a confirmed diagnosis. My days were long. 10 to 11 hours at the facility, capped by a full hour-long bike ride to and from work. To say I was tired all the time would be an understatement. It was a bone-deep exhaustion that never really left. So, while I wasn't thrilled about a party next door, I live in a city. Some noise is just part of the deal. Liam's initial patience, his willingness to let it slide, was a kindness his new neighbors would fail to recognize. They had no idea that they were pushing a man who, when his back was against the wall, would prove to be far more resourceful than they could ever imagine. I was prepared for some music and chatter. I was not prepared for what actually happened. This party was utterly wild. The sound wasn't just coming through the walls. People were shouting and carrying on in the communal hallway. And I could hear things breaking. It felt like the entire building was shaking. At 4 a.m, having not slept a wink, I finally went over. I introduced myself and tried to be as calm as possible, asking when their 20-plus guests might be leaving. I also explained that I had to be up at 6 a.m. for my healthcare job and pleaded with them not to have another party the next day. They promised they would quiet down for the rest of the night and swore there wouldn't be a party the next day. They didn't quiet down. And, plot twist, they had another party the very next day. And then another one the day after that. By this point, I was running on 3 consecutive nights without any real sleep. And I was starting to feel myself unravel. I was becoming a neurotic wreck. Each night, I'd spoken to the girls. And each night I'd receive a fresh round of profuse apologies. But absolutely nothing changed. It also made my skin crawl just having to stand in their doorway to talk to them. The apartment was packed, shoulder to shoulder with people. And I was acutely aware that I worked with extremely vulnerable individuals. The fear of carrying the virus to them was a heavy weight. This was a scary time, before reliable tests, before vaccines, before we knew much at all. Luckily, the weekend arrived, and they went home to their parents, allowing me a couple of days to recover. It's safe to say my opinion of my new neighbors was not high. Many who hear this part of the story say I was far too patient, that they would have lost their minds and gone to the media by the third night. Especially given my job working with the vulnerable. And honestly, looking back, they're probably right. Over the next few weeks, the massive parties stopped. But they were replaced by something almost as disruptive: a constant, unending flood of people. I mean constant. Their doorbell would ring up to 70 times in a single night. People were always coming or going. Always drunk. Always loud. Our communal hallway is all stone. A natural echo chamber. So every shout and laugh traveled through the entire building. Sleep was a lottery I never won. It was driving me insane. I could only count on sleeping from Friday to Sunday when they'd clear out to visit their parents. One night, while on my way to knock on their door yet again, I bumped into my upstairs neighbor, David. We quickly realized we were in the same boat and decided to join forces. David gave me the crucial piece of the puzzle. He told me the reason for the endless stream of visitors was that Chloe and Sophie were using their apartment as a makeshift bar. With all the actual bars closed due to lockdown, students were using their large apartment as a secret hangout. To make matters worse, a frat house across the street with 5 guys was doing the same thing. So people would bounce between the 2 locations, crossing the street whenever they wanted a change of scenery, turning our building's hallway into an extension of their private club. We tried talking to the girls again. We tried talking to their visitors. None of them cared. When we'd ask them to be quiet at 4 a.m., they'd just laugh at us. We were just the pesky neighbors. This revealed the students' greatest fatal flaw, their complete lack of empathy. Fueled by youthful arrogance, they saw us not as fellow human beings, but as mere obstacles to their fun. And that miscalculation would ultimately seal their fate. So, we started calling the police. Dozens of times. We knew we needed an official record of the disturbances. Most of the time, the students just wouldn't open the door. And the police told us there was nothing they could do. As one commenter later noted, it's a shared frustration in many countries. That feeling of helplessness when the police tell you their hands are tied. When the police failed, I fell back on my professional skills. I'm a social worker, so I'm good at digging up information and finding the right people to call. I contacted student unions, the town hall, anyone I could think of. They were sympathetic but powerless. Then, on David's suggestion, I took the next step. I found the email for the dean of the faculty one of the girls belonged to. I drafted a very polite email. I apologized for bothering him, but I explained that a large group of students, likely from his faculty, were gathering every night, breaking every COVID rule imaginable, and that my neighbor and I were on the verge of taking our story to the newspapers, as lockdown parties were a hot topic in the media. The dean called me back almost immediately. He was horrified and promised he was on it. What he did was call the law student, Chloe. And then he called her parents. Big drama ensued. Suddenly, we were granted a formal sit-down meeting with the girls. This time, they finally sounded sorry. There were even tears, for which I had zero patience. We found out the police had managed to get inside a few times and had issued them tickets, Euro 300 a pop. Why that hadn't stopped them was a mystery. One person later suggested they were likely charging for entry or drinks, running it like a business, which would explain how they could afford the fines. That thought suddenly made it all click into place. Their main complaint in the meeting? The dean had called them at 11 a.m. while they were still asleep. Well, there's your problem, I told them. You're asleep at 11 o'clock. I'm up at 6 every single day. And you haven't shown an ounce of understanding for that. We got to vent. And it felt like a small victory. We parted on what seemed like good terms, hoping this would finally be the end of it. But if that were the case, I wouldn't be telling this story. They didn't stop. They just got smarter. They moved the main party operation to the frat house across the street. The traffic in our hallway lessened slightly. But the noise from across the road was still a major problem. We were now in the second wave of the pandemic. And these students were still meeting in huge groups. While I hadn't seen friends or family in nearly a year. And the vulnerable people I cared for at work were forbidden from even seeing their own families. The injustice of it all was staggering. David happened to film one of the parties across the street and sent me the clip. We had been hesitant to go to the press. But we were out of options. As a test, I posted the clip on our country subreddit. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People were furious about others like them disregarding the rules. That was all the validation we needed. We decided to go all in. We contacted the press. And simultaneously, we went up the university food chain, contacting a vice-rector with the power to launch a formal disciplinary case. This person was high up. One of only 12 vice-rectors for a campus of 15,000 students. Things moved with shocking speed. Local news picked up the story from Reddit and contacted me for background info. They confirmed with police that officers had been to our address dozens of times. The next day, the piece was on their website. It went viral locally and was then promoted to the websites of most national newspapers. The headline was sensational: healthcare worker kept up at night by selfish students. AS police called dozens of times. Simultaneously, the vice-rector contacted us to take our official statements. And we made sure to send her the links to all the articles as they were published. The next day, I got a text from David. A film crew from the national news was on our doorstep. He declined to talk on camera. As did I. This was getting bigger than we ever imagined. But they ran the segment anyway. That night, at 7 p.m., I sat on my couch and watched my own street appear on the national news. They showed our building, talked about the dozens of police calls, and featured the local police spokesperson discussing the problem of students refusing to open their doors. And then came the best part. The news crew had been let into the frat house across the street by one of the students, who, in a moment of staggering short-sightedness, proceeded to confess everything on camera. He proudly admitted they'd been having parties, that they'd done it multiple times, and that they deliberately didn't let the cops in. He had no idea that his on-camera confession was the final nail in their coffin. The irrefutable proof the university needed to bring the hammer down. After the media storm died down, the university's disciplinary action went through. We sat down with Chloe and Sophie one last time. We wanted to clear the air and try to live together normally. Because we put in a semi-good word for them. They got off relatively lightly, 40 hours of community service and probation. The guys across the street, thanks to their televised confession, got 80 hours of service each. And, my personal favorite part, they each had to write us a personal letter of apology. Reading them was a deep and thorough pleasure. They all sounded like sad, dumb kids who'd finally been caught. We never wanted to escalate it this far. Some noise is normal. But their behavior was so extreme. We were forced to respond in kind. For the rest of the year, all it took was a simple text message to their apartment, and any noise would immediately stop. I hope they learned that even the most polite and chilled-out people can become incredibly determined when faced with enough sleep deprivation and disrespect. In the end, this wasn't just about noise. It was about a fundamental lack of respect during a time of national crisis. It proves that while patience is a virtue, there is always a limit. So I ask you, where is that line for you? We all want to be good neighbors. But at what point does patience run out and decisive action become necessary?